Hello, heathens. Welcome back to the Frigg'n Heathens podcast. We're Moxie, they, them.
And I'm Astrid, she, her.
We took a bit of a break over the holiday season to spend time with friends and family. We hope you had a restful and fun holiday season yourselves. This time around, we're going to be talking about land spirits and wights. That's W-I-G-H-T, by the way. Some good spots and resources to find more information about them and how to involve them in your practice. So to get started, what is a wight and some of the different types of wights?
Wight is defined by one author, Kveldulf Gundarsson, believe he works with the Troth, and in his book Elves, Wights, and Trolls, they're defined as a general term for intelligent beings of all sorts. Wight is the English word, while Veit or Vetir is the Norse word. So you'll hear both of these kind of used interchangeably depending on who you're talking to. This includes land wights, water wights, house spirits, humans, giants, animals, really anything with a mind of its own, including spiritual and unseen beings like gods, the dead, alfs or elves, trolls, tomta or tomten, nisa, nisar in Norwegian or Swedish, depending on your persuasion, all of those things. Technically, any being with an intelligence is a wight, including gods and humans. For the sake of clarity, though, and because modern heathens tend to make a distinction between humans, gods, and other beings, wights and Vetir are generally considered to be non-god, non-human beings that can have traits of gods or humans. It's kind of weird, but
Gotta have some word for it.
Yeah, we gotta have some word for it, and people like to categorize stuff, so it makes sense that way. Wights can be helpful towards humans, or harmful towards humans, or indifferent towards humans. The Huldra folk, or hidden folk, was later adopted in Scandinavian folklore to refer to land wights, Alfar and Disir, which were generally female spirits, often in a guardianship role depicted sometimes as the spirits of dead female ancestors as a whole. There are stories of them where any term could be used, and others where Alfar, Disir, or Land Vetir would be used instead. Generally, in modern language, we use land wight or land Vetir to refer to wights in nature, although there are specifically water wights called that. I don't speak Old Norse, so get ready for this. Water wights or vatnavetir, sea wights or sjovetir, and mountain wights, fjallvetir, all of those things. There's one for everything, basically. And modern heathens tend to divide them into land wights and house wights, generally, because they're two separate places in our modern lives.
Viter live everywhere. It's a very animist way of looking at the world to see Viter everywhere. Mm-hmm. You can respect and honor the ones in your own home, invite friendly ones into your home or property, and ward against harmful or unhelpful ones, including chasing away those ones that are causing trouble. And there are stories of both happening in the sagas and in folklore, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yes. And what do we know? Since we are a podcast about sources and we are nerds to the extreme, what do we know about wights or Vetir from historical sources, Mox?
Well, in the Norse sources, we have from Egil's Saga, chapter 60. When all was ready for sailing, Egil went up to the island. He took in his hand a hazel pole and went to a rocky eminence that looked inward to the mainland. Then he took a horse's head and fixed it on the pole. After that, in solemn form of curse, he thus spake, "Here I set up a curse pole, and this curse I turn on King Eric and Queen Gunhilda." Here he turned the horse's head landwards. "This curse I turn also on the guardian spirits who dwell in this land, that they may all wander astray, nor reach or find their home, till they have driven out of the land King Eric and Gunhilda." This spoken, he planted the pole down in a rift of the rock and let it stand there. The horse's head he turned inwards to the mainland, but on the pole he cut runes expressing the whole form of curse.
Yes, it's so metal.
Land wights were a thing, and he cursed the land wights to do what he wanted them to do. Sounds like a risky proposition.
It was basically make this king and his queen so miserable that they leave.
Yep.
And the name for the horse head on a pole is a nithing pole. How do you say that?
I never know.
I know. Yeah, we don't know how to say things. But it's a thing that, like, in pagan and heathen circles, you'll hear that. You gotta go knife them. So you'll go stick a horse head on a pole and face it towards him as it's a curse pole, basically. It's kind of a meme now, but it's a thing. It's historical.
It's historical. There was actually a story recently of a man in, I believe, Iceland, who got in trouble for erecting a knithing pole against one of his neighbors. He used a fish head
What?
instead of a horse head. Yes.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Okay, so here you go, folks. You heard it here. Use a fish head on a stick
Look, use what you got.
to
You
piss off your neighbor's land whites so they leave and you can buy their property and burn their house down.
Or don't.
Or don't. Okay, yeah. For liability reasons, don't do that.
Yeah. No, Iceland is a really big place though, where they still continue to celebrate a lot of traditions around wights and things like that. The Icelandic coat of arms it has on it a troll bull, a troll eagle, a dragon, and a handsome giant. And that all comes from the saga of Olag Tryggvasonar. King Harald asks a warlock to travel to Iceland to scout for him. The warlock is said to travel in a whale's shape and proceeds to circle Iceland looking for a place to reach the land. At all 4 places where he tried to land, he's met with hosts of land spirits of various sizes, but they were led by 4 main spirits at each of the fjords he tried to enter. A dragon with serpents, adders, and toads following behind, a bird so large its wings touched 2 mountains with other birds following, a giant bull wading out into the fjord followed by other wights, and a mountain giant taller than the mountains with an iron bar in his hand, accompanied by other giants.
That's so cool.
They took those 4 protectors of Iceland and put it on the Icelandic coat of arms.
It's also still on their coins on the back side, too, which is really cool.
That is really neat.
It's really neat. Like, if you Google Iceland coinage and the backside, it's just so cool. It's neat. So we've got Eyrbyggja saga, also is a good source for this. The place where Thorolf came ashore in Iceland after putting pillars from the high seat of a temple with Thor carved into them, overboard into the sea, and landing where they came ashore. He said that land was so holy that he would let no one desecrate it either with bloodshed or with excrement, and for a privy they used a special rock in the sea they called Dritskar, which is literally dirt scary. So the land was so holy because of the land wights welcoming them onto this one spot that you couldn't pee there. Yeah.
That will be a recurring theme.
Yes, it is a recurring theme. There's an idiom in Icelandic, apparently. Again, gonna butcher it. Atganga alfrek, which means to drive out the elves. And it's basically relieving yourself on holy ground is a big no-no because it makes the elves and other Vatyr leave. What a shocker.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was an interesting little tidbit that, yeah, you if you piss on someone's house, they tend to not want to stay in it. So they set aside a specific rock where you could do that on that land. It was interesting. Another big resource when looking for info on Vatyr, where you can find it anyway, because that was a whole thing, is folklore and folktales. Elves and wights often visit around Yule, according to folklore. But a good example is in Iceland, there's a custom called bidding the elves to come around Yule, where the woman of the house sweeps every corner of the home, lights candles wherever there is a shadow, and then walks around the outside of the house 3 times, saying, "Come, those who wish to come, stay, those who wish to stay, and fare, those who wish to fare, harmless to me and mine." And this insinuates that there's hospitality rules at play here. Guests are expected to behave as guests while in that house. And that includes those elves and those land spirits and house spirits that come to visit at Yule.
That's really interesting.
Isn't it? It's so cool. It's like, yeah, you can tell them to leave. Ha. And like in Norway, Yule season ended around January 13th when people drove out the dwarves from their homes, banging pots and pans through the house to chase away any of the Vatyr who may have overstayed their welcome. And this still happens to this day.
Banging pots and pans is such an effective way and accessible way of dealing with having things in your house you'd rather not have there.
Absolutely. And if you have kids, like, this is the best way to get them involved. If they want to. Like, if you want to get your kids involved in a very, like, innocuous way in clearing the energy out of your house, get your kids to run around through your house banging pots and pans, but then you have to take them away because if you don't, they'll just keep doing it.
It's true. They'll drive you out of the house if you don't stop them eventually.
Facts. You know, a lot of decorations even in America that we get this time of year in the Yule and Christmas season are gnomes, like little tomten or nisser if you're Swedish or Norwegian, and you bring them out. They hang out in your house for Yule, and then you put them away. Sometimes. If you're not me, they stay out all year.
Mine too.
Yeah, it's neat. And there's a lot of stories in folklore too of making offerings to Skogsra, which is like the maiden of the forest in Swedish and Norwegian stories. You leave an offering of silver for a good hunt or for her blessings on your hunt. Again, you kind of have to be specific in your requests. You may end up seeing a bunch of moose when deer are in season, or like a terrible downpour when you're looking for drinking water while backpacking or something. If you make an offering, like, you have to be specific. You can't just be like, I need water. It will rain on you.
Yeah, that's kind of a common theme with a lot of spirits in a lot of different cultures, is being very careful of your wording.
You have, like, with the fair folk, a lot of it is you don't give them your real name because then they have power over you. It's like that kind of thing. You have to be very, and they can't lie, but they will tell you everything but the truth. Like, it's very, you have to be real specific. You have to be real careful with what you say. It's like a contract. You have to be like, I want water, but I want specifically potable drinking water that's easy to access and not make my trip worse. That kind of thing. It's interesting. Yeah. I love folklore like that. You can get so much out of it.
Yeah.
And you found some cool stuff about house wights specifically in folktales that I couldn't find.
I did. I looked everywhere for house wights in the lore, and there isn't anything that I have found or anyone that I have asked who knows much more than I do who has ever seen anything about house wights in the lore itself. Like, not in sagas, not in the Eddas, not in anything like that. But like everything with heathenry, people didn't write shit down.
Yeah.
And the everyday stuff that people took for granted was the least likely to be mentioned.
Facts.
So what we have on house wights comes from folklore. They were typically, though not always, seen as male guardians of the house and farm in folktales. They were often referred to as dwarves, helping with tasks ranging from caring for the animals and even helping out with housework. There was one story of a dwarf who came to a house and asked to stay and was allowed in the house, and he even helped with the financial matters of the home.
That's so cool.
And ensured that the farm was prosperous. In return, gifts of porridge were often left out for them. It was said that they preferred porridge with a pat of butter on top. Neglecting the porridge would be seen as a slight, and the wight would cause havoc in the farm, from breaking things to killing the livestock. There was one story of a farmer's wife was putting out the porridge, and she put the pat of butter on the bottom of the porridge instead of the top.
Rude.
And the wight went to eat his porridge and was angry because there was no pat of butter, and he went and killed like the best horse on the farm.
Oh no.
And then came back to eat his porridge and saw the butter at the bottom.
Oh no.
And was like, oh no. So yeah, there were definitely some rules about how to offer to them and what it was they preferred. And those would vary according to region. That's just one particular story of how neglecting wights can be a bad thing.
There's that, it's kind of like a folktale, fairy tale thing about the cobbler who needs help making shoes.
Yes.
And so, like, the elves come and help make shoes for him during the night, and he stops caring that he's not doing the work, they're doing the work. Why should he care about them? I don't remember what happens, but it wasn't good. He doesn't give them credit. Yeah, they left.
I think they left.
They're like, oh, you're not going to help us? You're not going to give us some nice shit for helping us make your stupid shoes? Okay, bye. Those are interesting.
Yep. And that does tie in with the folklore, because they're mentioned as being easily offended by rudeness. Like farm workers swearing, urinating in the barns. There's the urinating again. They don't like that.
It's the piss episode, people. Sorry. We knew it was coming.
Or just generally not treating the wights well. In some cases was said to lead to a physical attack, where the landwight would actually physically attack a person. If anyone spilled something on the floor in the niece's house, in the niece's Norwegian?
Yes.
Finland. Norwegian.
Yes.
Yes, in the niece's house. It was considered good manners to shout a warning.
Don't step here, it's slippery.
Yeah, just so they know. Now, happy wights, on the other hand, would bring good fortune to the homestead, even going so far as to steal livestock or milk from the neighbor's farm to improve his family situation, which, while I appreciate the dedication, is probably not the best way to go about doing things.
Yeah, but if they're not treating their land whites well, then you know what? I'm not going to justify this. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm
No.
not gonna.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna justify this.
No. Now, despite the fact that we can't find any records prior to Christianization and in folklore, there are a lot of folktales post-Christianization demonizing house whites, with one homestead's good fortune often seen as a sign of having a house white, and the accusation of that was rather akin to being accused of witchcraft.
Really?
It'd be a serious thing. Like if someone got jealous that your farm was doing better than theirs, they would say, "Oh, you must have a house white." And that would be taken like a really horrible thing, like you were engaging in these pagan practices.
Yeah, your crops are doing better than mine, so you're a witch.
Exactly.
We'd had none of that happen in America at all.
I'm
kidding. I'm kidding, listeners. I am kidding.
Yes. I did find a 13th century text, The Tale of Thorvald the Far-Traveled. It matches the info in the Saga of the Christianization of Iceland, where a bishop is said to drive out a farmer's house white to prove the Christian god's superiority over those spirits. That can be interpreted as evidence of a pre-Christian practice, even without other evidence of house spirits directly in the lore. Those stories are, however, significantly post-Christianization, being 13th century texts, so you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. You can infer those things from it, but it's not contemporary to the time.
Yeah.
In Finland and other parts of Europe, there are folktales equating the house spirit with ancestors, either of blood or previous residents of the house. Sometimes said like to be the first resident of the house or someone who died in the house. Some of them get pretty gruesome, actually. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. Maybe a bit much for here. So we won't go into it in detail. But yeah, a lot of this I got from the Claude LeCouteaux's book.
Oh, Tradition
of Household Spirits. Yeah. I had to double check before I got that wrong. So there were celebrations to honor the Vitir at the same time as the feast in honor of ancestors, because of the connection between ancestors and house whites.
And that makes sense. Oh, what is it? Alpha bloat is in the fall. It's usually around Halloween time, I believe. And it's kind of that same vibe. Like you've got whites and ancestors being celebrated at the same time because they do a lot of the same things. They can be protective, they can be helpful, you can work with them, and you can also offend them. So, it's hard. It's hard to offend them, but you can do it. And trying to find information on house spirits in resources was a nightmare. Because it's I think it was just that phenomenon of it was a daily thing that they didn't think was special or weird enough to have to write down, because everybody did it and it was just a part of daily life. They just didn't write it down.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of infer a lot of information from folklore and from laws saying don't do this thing, which means as a pagan you do that thing.
Yeah.
It was headache inducing.
And there is a lot that you can glean from laws.
So much.
Yeah, early Icelandic laws prohibited ships with dragon head prows from entering the harbor, lest the frightening appearance of the ship threatened the tranquility of the Landvitir. It was the beginning of the preamble of the heathen laws that men should not take ships to sea with carved figureheads upon their stems, but if they did, they should take them off before they came in sight of land, and not sail to land with gaping heads or yawning snouts, lest the guardian fays of the land should be scared thereat. That's in Landnámabók, Part 4, Chapter 7.
Yep, and there's a link in the description. Yes.
So you don't have to rely on my horrible pronunciation to, figure out what that is.
And it's interesting because that would insinuate that if you were invading somewhere else or invading someone else's land or whatever, you would put those dragon head prows on your ship to scare away the land whites that you were, we are here to take over.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But if you were going into harbor, like after raiding, you were going home, you take that shit off. Because you don't want to piss off the spirits of the place you live.
Yeah.
You just want to scare away the other guys.
Makes sense.
It's so cool. It's so interesting. And there's some amazing preserved ones from the Oseberg ship burial it's gorgeous. Like, it's just intricately carved.
They're beautiful.
And it's beautiful. So I'm sure not all of them were that detailed because that one was for a ship burial specifically, but it's so cool. It's fascinating.
It is. It is. There were some other very useful laws enacted around 970 AD. There were canons enacted under King Edgar's reign, and this is in England, so this would be more related to Anglo-Saxon practices. But they forbade worship of wells, fountains, groves, trees of diverse sorts, and stones. And the quote there is, "And that every priest industriously advance Christianity and extinguish heathenism, and forbid the worship of fountains and necromancy and auguries and enchantments and soothsayings and false worship and legerdemain, which carry men into various impostures, and to groves and ellens, and also many trees of diverse sorts and stones. And many do exercise themselves in a variety of whimsies to such a degree as they by no means ought to do." Which means I ought to do all of those things.
Right? Like, as a pagan and as like an aging punk rocker, reading old laws that are telling people not to do these pagan things, it's just the best thing ever for me, because I can just embrace my anti-authoritarian best self and go, oh, yeah, I can do all of this.
Yeah.
Damn the man.
And the fact the fact that the law was written at all, I think, indicates worship of land spirits was still ongoing at the time, because if they weren't doing it, there'd be no reason to make a law against it.
Oh, yeah. And, like, that's a big thing still in Celtic folklore, especially in wells, like sacred wells. And it's in, like, the Arthurian legends, which were very Christian. They're everywhere. There's always a sacred well, and there's always a sacred grove of trees. There's something cool there. And telling people not to worship stuff there means there's probably stuff there to worship. Yeah. Just saying.
Yep. Interestingly enough, King Canute made laws forbidding some of these same heathen practices as much as 50 years later. And what his law says, "And we earnestly forbid every heathenism. Heathenism is that men worship idols. That is, that they worship heathen gods and the sun or the moon, fire or rivers, water wells or stones, or forest trees of any kind, or love witchcraft, or promote morth work in any wise, or by bloat, or by firth, or perform anything pertaining to such illusions." That's a pretty comprehensive definition of heathenry.
Yeah, right? The sun and the moon and fires and rivers, wells, rocks, trees. Yep.
Idols,
sounds about
heathen
right.
gods. Yeah, I mean, it's got it all there. And so the fact that, and there are several like this. There are several canons that are enacted under these kings' reign and the king's laws themselves. And the fact that they also made laws forbidding some of the same heathen practices 50 years after Edgar's reign suggests that the practices were still ongoing, even after laws were enacted to punish those who participated in them. So there was some degree of practice still lingering for a while.
Yeah, that's so cool. So we know a little bit now about what we've got in sources, like resources, historical sources, a little bit of archaeology, some folklore. And we talked a little bit about how, like, Iceland particularly still does a lot of modern practice around land spirits. So let's talk about modern practices, because those are really interesting.
They are. There is a story, which we will link below, where there was a road that was proposed in Iceland, and people got up in arms because it was set to go right over. It would disturb elves living in its path. There were boulders, one called Elf Chapel and one called Elf Church, and they were in the path of the planned construction. And the construction work had to be stopped while a solution was found.
So cool.
They were like, nope, I'm sorry, there are elves here. You really, really can't do that. And so they stopped and were like, what can we do?
And chances are, like, people had called that thing Elf Chapel and Elf Church for hundreds of years, maybe?
Probably. They finally resolved the matter. A local lady who claims to talk to elves mediated, and they agreed to the road so long as their chapel was carefully moved and put elsewhere. The chapel was, I believe, 70 tons, and they declined to say how much it was going to cost to relocate it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And in the article we link, there's a picture of this boulder, and it is twice as tall as the guy standing next to it. Like, it's huge.
It's huge.
It is a huge boulder. But they moved it.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I love it.
Interestingly enough, there's a parallel to that kind of idea of there being consequences to disturbing sacred stones and such in the Cornish Book of Ways. So that would be for Cornwall, not not for Iceland or the Scandinavian countries. But it tells of land spirits who protect the sacred sites of Cornwall. And a story is told of a farmer who tried to clear a group of standing stones on his property so he'd have more land to farm. And the lead horse pulling down the first stone was struck by sudden panic and died on the spot.
I have a feeling that moving standing stones you don't.
I would not.
No. Like, it's not even just because I'm a heathen. Like, you don't fuck with that shit. Leave it alone.
Yeah, it's been there longer than you. Just let it be there.
Like, it's there for a reason. Just leave it. Just leave it.
Yes.
Ugh.
In that same story, actually, the guy who was part of the department who worked on the land and was talking to this reporter talked about a time when he failed to thank a house elf. His name was Peter, and his family had a protective elf in the wild north of the country who brought them good fortune. And in this case, it was a female elf. We've said that most of them in folklore are male, but not all of them are. In this case, it was a female elf. And when he'd gone on a camping trip to an isolated area, his father asked him to go and pay his respects to the elf and to thank her. And he said, "But I don't believe in elves, so I sort of forgot."
This is going to end great.
Yeah, it's going to end great for him. The next day, despite the overcast sky and drizzle, he woke up so badly blistered by what appeared to be sunburn that he could barely stand.
Oh, no.
Yeah, don't piss off the house elves.
Oh, no. Oh, that's so bad. That's so bad. Oh, yep. Even now, today, urinating on and shitting on sacred ground is said to make elves leave and land spirits leave, because I shouldn't have to explain why. I shouldn't have to explain why. Like, that's yeah, don't do it.
It's extreme disrespect.
Yes, like, if you go somewhere in the woods and, listen, I grew up in Colorado. I grew up skiing. We'd drive into the mountains to go skiing, and sometimes on the way home, we'd be stuck in traffic because there would be a blizzard. We'd be parked on the highway with everyone else on the highway while it was blizzarding, waiting for the roads to clear. You have to pee sometimes. You do what you gotta do. But if you can, in any way, make it less, I don't know, do it as respectfully as you can. Like, if you have to, do it, but bury it. I don't know, dig a hole and bury it. Like, don't poop in the middle of
Dig a hole and bury would be nice, just in general, probably speaking to the land spirits and saying, I mean no disrespect.
Yeah.
This is a human need.
It's like, sorry. Also, like, don't do, like, go into the woods. Like, go off the trail. Hello, go off the trail a little bit. Don't poop somewhere that's like the middle of a grove of trees. I don't know. Pay attention to where, you should pay attention to where you're going to the bathroom anyway. But I went off the rails. I'm sorry. Anyway, don't pee on sacred ground. You're welcome. And so another modern practice is like Iceland's coat of arms and coinage. Those are two very obvious carryovers from working with land spirits and land wights. And another interesting one that people don't talk about very often is techno-pagans, which is a weird one. It's a weird kind of very, very modern thing, which is a little bit, it's animism, but with modern technology. So like computers, machines, cars, phones, all of that stuff. People who consider themselves techno-pagans see those items as having their own spirits.
And it makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, everything is made up of rocks and metals and trees, and, everything we have comes from the land, just refined and shaped and formed. Mm-hmm. You put all that together, and if a group of trees can have a spirit, why not a group of all these other natural things that have been made into something?
That's an interesting way to look at that. I like that. I mean, and like, there's that meme about how people will pack bond with anything.
Yeah.
Like, people naming their Roombas and, their like Roombas putting googly eyes on them and stuff. Like, that is kind of techno-pagany. Like, does the Roomba have a spirit? Does it judge your dirty floors? Maybe.
Maybe.
It's also its job.
Yeah. I cannot have a Roomba.
No. Me neither. Right before we were recording, Mox was yelling at their Alexa. And that's another one. Anybody who has an Amazon Echo is doing techno-paganism, kind of.
You can see it that way, anyway.
You can
have that mindset.
Yes, you can. I mean, yes, it's a software thing. It blah, 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 voice cues, blah, blah, blah. But you still talk to it. Like, I yell at mine.
Yeah.
I yell at Alexa when my timer will not stop beeping.
Mine will sometimes speak to me when I have not spoken to it.
Yes. Oh, it's so weird when that happens. It is unsettling. It is.
It is. It's like, I didn't ask for your help with that, but
no.
Okay.
Yeah, but like Techno-pagans is fun. Like in the hold, we have a thing where if someone's having computer trouble, we sacrifice RAM in emojis. Like,
yes, not the type of animal.
No, computer RAM, memory sticks.
We have an emoji with a memory stick with fire around it for sacrificing RAM.
Yes, it's silly and it's fun and it works. And people talk about like tech gremlins and tech goblins and stuff living in your computer, messing it up, and actually, like, I like the idea of computer spirits, because like if you're not maintaining your computer well, including the hardware, not just the software, it's not going to work as effectively.
No.
It's going to be mad at you, even if being mad at you is literally just it's breaking because you're not taking care of it.
Just weird software bugs and things like that happen more often.
Yep, it's interesting. Like, techno-pagans are a thing. It's a relatively new thing. And the internet. People see the internet as a living thing in a lot of ways, too.
Yeah.
Because it has a lot of characteristics of a living organism. It's interesting.
It is interesting. I haven't delved much into techno-paganism.
I haven't either. I might look into it a little more because it is really interesting. But that is definitely a thing that a lot of people do when it comes to wights and spirits is technology. Now that we have some examples of some modern practices as far as wights and spirits and land spirits and house spirits go, how do you work with them in your own practice? And for specific wights like elves, politeness and manners are fairly common threads when dealing with them. And that kind of goes for everything. Don't mess with their houses or move their stuff without permission. Be respectful. Don't pee in the woods without paying attention to where you're peeing. There's so much peeing in this episode. So much peeing.
I did not think this would be a common thread when I started researching this.
No, I didn't either. And it's just, but it is. It is. You have to also like listen to your house wights and your land wights when they tell you stuff. If they tell you stuff. And don't boast about any favors or gifts that they've given you if that's a thing that happens to you. Elves vary from fair folk in Ireland and British Isles. A lot of times there are living traditions around the fair folk in those places that differ from what the general population outside of those practices knows about them. And I highly encourage you to look into that on your own because I don't know enough about it to say one way or another.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because elves tend to make things like gold or useful items look like dead leaves or trash. Whereas like their UK counterparts have a tendency to make twigs and rocks look like treasure. So it's kind of, it's a weird switch.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's also rude not to eat food or drink offered by wights in Germanic folklore. Whereas it's dangerous to do that in the Celtic folklore. You hear stories about people going, into a mound in England, and if you eat the food that they're offered you, it looks nice, but it's either rotten food or they're tricking you to stay there. Like, it's interesting. It's a really weird it's a really weird thing.
It's a reversal, of the way it is.
Yeah, it's a weird reversal. So that thing of respect and manners is a good place to start when working with wights in your practice.
Yeah.
Picking up litter as far as land wights go, tidying up your garden or any green space near you, leaving animal and environment safe offerings like bird seed or water, not alcohol. Alcohol is bad for the soil.
Yes. Nothing with still too much salt either.
Yes, nothing with too much salt, nothing with chocolate, stuff that would be okay if a stray cat came and ate it, or a dog came and ate it, or leave your stuff where that stuff wouldn't happen. Whatever.
Yeah.
Pay attention to those things. Also, don't poop or pee where you're not supposed to, I guess. I guess.
Yeah.
I'm really confused about how, well, I'm not confused. I know exactly how it happened. I'm still amazed at how many times I've said the words poop and pee in this episode. But those are good things to know.
Those are good things to know. I would say there's also precedent to look to the Wights for help in protecting the land you live on because of the story of Iceland's protectors.
Yeah. Having, leaving an offering. I know. We're just distracted by poop and pee. It's just... Welcome back to recording with Astrid and Moxie. But yeah, like leaving offerings for your house wights and your land wights to protect your home from break-ins. Like, I have done that. When we lived in an area that was prone to break-ins and people stealing shit from our garage if it was open and all of this stuff. Those things are good.
Yeah.
Keeping people off your property if you don't want them on your property. I mean, you could always put a fish head on a stick on the corner of your property. Like, that works,
For
Whatever.
more than one reason.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons why it does work, but yeah.
Yeah.
Whew.
So what is it that you do to work with Wights?
For my house wights, I will leave a small cup of coffee first thing in the morning. I have a little wooden altar structure that looks like a little house, kind of inspired by the old Norwegian stave churches that my husband built for me that I use as like a little house wight house. And I leave it there for them in the morning. I try like hell to keep my house clean. It's messy, but it's not dirty, all right?
I feel that.
We are not a picked up household, but we are a clean household. You can still sit on my floor, so you might have to move some stuff out of the way first. We try to make sure like trash is picked up around the property outside for the landvitier. We try to make sure we don't have loose trash in the house too. We pick up trash on walks. I always bring a grocery bag with me when I go on a walk. I do that. I also spread birdseed in the yard for the land spirits. I learn types of birds and plants that grow near me because I see them. They're always out there, so why not? And I always try to include them in rituals or prayers or whatever I do because they're literally right there. They're way easier to access than gods on a larger scale, They're right there. They're literally in my house. They're literally in my backyard. And they're going to be having the most interaction with me on a daily basis rather than a god. Really, in my experience and in my personal practice. That's how I work. And you do things a little differently.
I do. I have the little gnomes that I don't put away at Christmas time on my altar to represent the house wights. And we offer pretty things that we find for the house wights. My kids have made little tiny origami swans as gifts that we'll leave on the altar for them and some things like that. As far as land wights, we do leave some of our excess harvest from our garden out for the animals. We keep the yard clean. We do all of that. I'm actually looking to do some landscaping, and I'm looking into native plants to put back in there. We have bunnies that live under our shed.
Aww.
And they need more bushes to hide under. And so some things that are safe for the environment locally and would be locally found, I think is a good way to honor the land wights.
Absolutely. I think that's really cool.
We have fallen behind on housework, but
that's the American way.
We have 6 people and I have to count 5 cats. Yes,
oh my God.
5 cats in our house. So it gets a bit overwhelming to keep up with all of that.
Yeah, a little bit.
But we do our best.
Mm-hmm. A lot of things that I've heard from other heathens and a handful of indigenous people, this is by no means, it's not a monolith, okay? But one way that I know a lot of people honor land wights is by acknowledging the names for those things and the places that they live that were indigenous names. I have friends who live in Western Washington who are pagan, and Mount Rainier, the native name for it is Tahoma. So they refer to Mount Rainier as Tahoma when they do rituals in their yard because they can see Mount Rainier from their yard. And that's their way of honoring the land spirits. And from what as long as, again, indigenous practices are initiatory in a lot of ways. And I feel like you need to do some research first, figure those things out for yourself and with the help of indigenous people, please. Doing research on the native tribes who lived in your area is a good way to understand the area you live in a little better, and figuring out like native plants that live there, stuff that helps with, I don't know, birds and bees.
Yeah.
All of that stuff. Like, those things are all really good. Do those things. That's helpful.
Absolutely.
So, to sum up, working with house wights, treat your home with respect. You're sharing space with spirits, essentially. Leaving offerings, always a good idea. And be polite. It's basically like living with roommates that can't tell you when you're being a slob, or that the trash you left in the trash can stinks and needs to be taken out, or that they'd really like to have the shelf that they live on be dusted a little bit, Astrid.
They can't tell you with words. Sometimes you can tell when they're upset.
Yeah. Like, if stuff feels weird in your house, like if people are irritable, I mean, of course, life happens. People are people. Life is life. It has ups and downs. But, like, if stuff seems to be missing more often than normal...
That's an anecdote I have heard quite often.
Yeah. If you're usually that person who can always find their keys, like me, and then all of a sudden you can't find your keys consistently, maybe you need to, I don't know, pay attention to your fucking housewives more, Astrid. Because that is the thing. That is the thing. And, like, if stuff keeps breaking, or you keep, like, stuff getting lost it's a big sign for a lot of people that your housewives aren't happy with you. So paying attention to those things, because just basically, you're having a roommate who can't talk to you. So you have to pay attention and be the best roommate you can, and you'll have a good time, generally.
Absolutely.
So do you have any final thoughts on Betier?
Basically, it's all about respect. As we said earlier, wights can mean any type of being from, humans, Landvatir, Husvatir, gods. And it's about treating them as respect as other beings who also exist in the same space you're in. Yeah, so watch where you pee. Don't be a slob. And should be good.
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid. And, as usual, we will have links to our resources in the description. Let us know in comments or in emails or whatever what you do with land wights and house wights. And if we do something differently from how you do it, how do you do it? This is so individualized that there's no one right way to do anything other than don't be a dick and don't piss on their houses. I feel like those are the really two hard and fast rules.
Those are the big ones. Offerings as well go a long way.
And offerings, yes. And offerings, yeah. Be nice to them.
You have any final thoughts more than that, or are we good?
I think that pretty much sums it up.
Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully our next episode will not be 2.5 months from now.
No.
Now that the holidays are over.
No, we're back now. We are back now.
Yeah. The holidays are over. Life has stopped being a total fuck for a little while. And hopefully we will be back shortly with another episode.
Absolutely.
So as always, cite your sources, label your UPG, and always question everything.
Bye, everybody.